unless you've been closely connected with missionary fundraising, it's probably a little trickier to imagine the ways you can support missionaries. I mean, there's the obvious, like giving and praying, but there's honestly a few extra that a lot of people don't think about or even probably do. So in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 5 ways you can support missionary fundraising. Whether these missionaries are your friends or maybe they're missionaries your church supports, whatever it is, these tips will help equip you have a large part in supporting and sending missionaries in today's day and age. Now let's get started. Tip number 1 is to give. So if you asked 100 Christians, hey, what's the way you can support missionary fundraising? They would all probably say give or pray, probably both. But give is one of the most, right? Giving money, whether that's monthly or to a mission trip, that's one of the most common ways people think of to support missionaries today. It's 100% true, but I want to give some extra perspective, right? So my wife and I have had the ability to fully fundraise our salaries and move overseas to do full-time mission work. So I want to give an extra perspective. So what I want to say 2 specific things. One is, I think it's often easy to forget acknowledging the fact that people, whenever they answer the call to move overseas or move to a mission field full-time, whether that's in the same country, even maybe the same state, or out of the country, whatever it is, they are sacrificing their consistent income from maybe whether it's even a church that's paying them consistently a salary or a job that's paying them a salary, and they're saying, okay, I believe in the Lord's call and the Lord calling me here so much that I'm willing to sacrifice that to have what could be considered and is usually an unsteady or inconsistent income, right? You are then dependent on people giving faithfully smaller amounts to support you, not forgetting to renew their card whenever the card expires, things like that. We probably had 50 to 60 people that gave monthly, okay? And so we had to help them remember, hey, your card expired, things like that. We did a lot of that work, and so it's really difficult. So there's a lot that goes into it, and you're putting a lot of trust into people that sometimes you don't even know super well. It's very different from just going and finding a job or something like that. You have to rely on other people to give continually and faithfully. Now, the next thing is there's a chance if you're supporting missionaries and have had a conversation with them that they have actually brought this up or tried to help you get this perspective, but the goal is you try to change the perspective on what you're giving money to. Okay, so there's this person sitting in front of you, probably asking you to give, or maybe they sent you a letter or an email or a phone call or text, something like that, right? So it's hard not to say, okay, I'm giving to this person. And in a way, you 100% are, right? You're giving to this person. But ultimately, if we look at the broad picture, what you're doing is you're giving to the work of the Lord. I believe the Lord is calling you to take the gospel to Asia, to the inner city of Dallas, something like that, right? So you're saying, I affirm that, and I believe so much, I'm going to give to help you take the gospel. So then you become a part in helping take the gospel to that place, right? So you're giving not to a person. It's not like, hey, we're trying to give money so this person can freeload and travel the world. No, not at all. You're giving money so the gospel can be taken to parts of the world that maybe aren't hearing the gospel, are receiving the gospel, or need a lot more intentional discipleship for the sake of the gospel, right? And so changing our perspective on what are you giving to is extremely important, okay? And realizing you're giving to the work of the Lord. You're not giving to this person's lifestyle, but you're giving to the work of the Lord. And like I said, hopefully there's a strong chance the missionary you're supporting has talked to you about that and had that conversation, that kind of perspective of like, hey, I'm not asking you to give to me. I'm asking you to give to the work of the gospel, right? And so, but that's something super important to remember when you're thinking through supporting a missionary. You're supporting the work of the Lord, and you're supporting the gospel being taken to the ends of the earth. Okay, the second way to support missionaries is to read their updates. Now, we're kind of in this, like, I've had a lot of conversations with missionaries who are sending updates. It definitely varies from some send it 4 times a year. That's all, like once a quarter. We sent ours every single week because we were very active about that. We were very proactive. We wanted people to have ways to pray for us and know what we're doing and the work we're doing. So we send them every week. Some people still mail them out, which is, I think, a little more rare for sure. But so what I would encourage you, if you don't get frequent updates from the missionary you support, maybe ask them, and you don't even have to say, hey, send me more updates, but you could just be like, hey, what's your thought process in this? Why do you only send it this much instead of this much? Things like that. And have that conversation and I would maybe even encourage them, tell them you want to know ways to pray for you more often, something like that. So I would talk to them about that. But reading their updates really provides a lot of support in ways you probably wouldn't even imagine. So we would send updates every single week. Our open rate was great. There were hundreds of people reading our updates, and we were super grateful for that. But oftentimes it felt like we were just sending it to nobody, right? Like nobody was responding, nobody was engaging, which I know that's not true, but that was what it felt like a lot. And so, but whenever we only had the opportunity to come back to the States once, whenever we came back to the States, people would talk about the things we sent in our update emails. And so that acknowledgement of them reading it was so encouraging to know, oh man, people have cared about us for a while. Or there would be a lot of people every once in a while who would respond to the email updates. That's what I would say. Respond to the email updates as much as you can. That's so encouraging to just know people are engaging with the work of the Lord you are doing and care about the work of the Lord you are doing. We were on the other side of the world, literally, so it was really hard not to feel isolated. So things like this help missionaries not feel isolated and not feel alone as much whenever people are regularly engaging with their email updates and regularly reading about them and commenting, things like that. It's super encouraging. Okay, tip number 3 is to communicate with the missionaries who support. Like I mentioned earlier, it's really easy to feel isolated if you're a missionary. It doesn't even have to be if you're in a foreign country. You could be in the exact same state you live in, but if you're in a place you're not from, you're not familiar with, it's really easy to feel isolated and feel like, oh, it's hard to have relationships because everything's ministry, because it is your whole life, right? And so communicating with missionaries really helps them feel encouraged. So whether it could be, like I said, responding to their email updates, or maybe just send a text or an email saying, hey, we're thinking of you, we're praying for you, and we're so grateful for how you are answering the call the Lord has put in your life to pursue full-time missions, right? Whether they're in the season of fundraising, that's a very isolating season as well, or maybe they're already serving the Lord in the way He has called them to serve. Whatever it is, I would really encourage you to try to communicate as much as you can. I'll try to communicate with them, just to maybe have an email conversation or a text message conversation, or maybe even hop on a phone call or a FaceTime call. Something like that would really, I guarantee, help encourage the missionaries you support. The 4th way you can support missionaries is to ask about their needs. And so definitely when you're asking, I would leave it open. It's definitely open to hey, is there anything you're running low on, tangible items that you need? For sure, that's completely fine. But I think a lot of the time, what we don't realize is there's more than that. So when we were overseas, we were in Asia, we were studying a language full time, and there weren't a lot of people in our city who spoke English outside of our team members. They were our coworkers in our church family, things like that. But it was really easy and we didn't really have a ton of friends there. There weren't a lot of people in the city who spoke English, like I said, and it was really difficult, really easy to feel isolated. That's a really common thing for missionaries. We felt very isolated at times, and our brains were dead with the language we were trying to learn and just shove in our heads as fast as we could, right? And so a lot of our needs kind of were less tangible items because the Lord had been gracious and provided fundraising, and more, I don't even know what the word would be, but more emotional needs. Hey, if somebody were to hop on a FaceTime call with me and just talk to me about their life, ask about my life, and just kind of have almost if you and I were to go to coffee and grab coffee, something like that, but in a different form. Having that constant communication was one thing I would have said, hey, this is what I need, right? This is one thing I need in this time. Not only that, but sometimes there's prayer requests that not everybody knows about. And so we had hundreds of people on our newsletter. So there were prayer requests that we had during the time we were overseas that were maybe specific to us or our families that we didn't feel comfortable sending to hundreds of people. And so, but if somebody would have reached out and been like, hey, how can we pray for you? We would have been a lot more open. And we had a couple of people do that, but we were a lot more open to telling maybe 1 or 2 people these more intimate prayer requests than we were telling hundreds of people on our newsletters. So things like that are ways, whenever you ask their needs, answers that I can almost guarantee you'll get. And I know it's going to be one of those things you're going to ask and it's going to be like, oh no, we're fine. And you'll have to ask a few times, but whenever they see that you're consistent and that you care, it's not just kind of in vain of like, oh, I'm just going to ask to be nice, but I don't really mean it. Not that that's what you're doing, but whenever they see that, oh, they're really trying consistently and they really care, they're trying to establish that relationship, then I think is when they'll open up a lot more. The last way to support Missionaries fundraising is to pray, right? This is one of the most common things, and it's probably what you expected. You can pray for the missionaries that you are supporting, and that is one of the greatest ways. Like I said, hopefully you get email updates regularly or some form of updates regularly where you get prayer requests, ways to pray for them, so you can pray for them as often as possible and have them in maybe your family's prayer time or your personal prayer time, whatever that looks like, or your church's prayer time. But having consistent prayer requests so you know how to be praying for them is really important. I recently read a biography about William Carey and just his time as a missionary, things like that. And I was just imagining how difficult it must have been to communicate prayer requests and to communicate needs that they had, right? It was in the 1700s, 1800s, so there wasn't an easy way for communicating, especially when it came across country borders and things like that. And so I just am grateful for the fact that we live in a day and age where we can send missionaries and support missionaries and pray for missionaries and hear about the work missionaries are doing in a way that nobody has ever been able to do in the history of sending missionaries. We have FaceTime, we have video opportunities, we have photos, we have email, all of these things, even text notifications, stuff like that, to where you can really have a huge hand in the work that you are giving to and the work the Lord you're giving to overseas, in another city, in another state, in another country, whatever that looks like. And so it's such a cool thing to reflect on and think about. I hope this resource was really helpful and encouraging for you, whether you are somebody who is actively supporting missionaries and gives you techniques on how you can do that, or maybe you're a missionary wanting to help your patrons and supporters know how they can better support you. I hope this was helpful. If you like the content, be sure to follow along as we'll release videos like this every single week. And check out our website where we, again, have multiple articles to help you fundraise as a missionary, help you support missionaries fundraising, or maybe even figure out how to fundraise for a short-term mission trip. Whatever it is, we are working to provide helpful content to help you take the gospel all over the world. Also, check out our course, Modern Fundraising for Missionaries, where we give you practical tips and tools to learn how to fundraise in a digital age. We are so excited. It's coming out quickly, so be sure to be on the lookout as we get closer to the date. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.